Hey guys, hope everyone's doing okay. We're all good on my home front here. Kids are driving me crazy a little bit, but I can't complain. Uh, I'm your American history teacher, and if I don't move forward and teach you about some things that have happened in the second half of our country's history, like Vietnam, or like the Civil Rights Movement, or like the 80s, 90s, all the way through to today, if I don't teach you about it, you might not ever officially learn about it in school, and that would be pretty weird. That would be pretty bad to be a citizen of the U.S. and not have learned about those things. So I am going to push forward at a, I think, pretty slow, manageable pace. But I just wanted to say that we are going to move on. Please, if you're struggling, let me know. I'll work with you. You know me by now. So back to World War II, huh? Where did we leave off? Well, I remember Hitler was dead. Remember how we landed at D-Day over here? England, Normandy, France. D-Day came, liberated Paris, pushed on into Belgium. Battle of the Bulge happened where Hitler pushed back. But we do push through with the help of the British and the French. And we're pushing on. And Germany used to be all of this. This used to all be German, but not anymore. We're squeezing from this way. The Russians are squeezing from this way. Here's the capital, Berlin. Who's going to get there first? Well, the Soviets do. But remember how Hitler was in the bunker underground? And he ended up committing suicide. So by May 8th, 1945, there's VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. May 8th, 1945. So the war's over in Europe. That's a big party. Hooray. But what about the other side of this war? The PTO, the Pacific Theater. What are we going to do? How are we going to end it? This is where we left off on that last day, that Friday. We were talking about things like the Battle of Iwo Jima. They called it Bloody Iwo. This famous picture of the guys raising the flag. Remember that? We talked about a couple months after that, Battle of Okinawa. Tens of thousands of people dying. Remember the Bushido Warrior Code? Remember that? How they refused to give up. Kill 10 Americans before you die. Things like that. So we started way back at Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941. Battle of Midway. We're pushing. Hop. Remember the island hopping? We also talked about the really sad examples of what happened at Battle of Saipan, where the Japanese civilians living there wouldn't surrender, and the families were committing suicide instead of surrendering to the U.S. It's terrible stuff. So again, the question is, how are we going to end this thing? Remember we talked about the firebombing of Japan, where we use these planes, we're using the runways of Iwo Jima and Okinawa to drop bombs on mainland Japan, and we're talking about 0.9 million Japanese civilians being killed over the course of like February, March, April, May, June, July. And that's a whole other story. We talked about it. This is just a review. But the point is the Japanese still won't surrender. So, yeah, we could have done some other things. We could have had an invasion. I told you about how my grandfather loved to tell the story how I wouldn't be here if we had invaded mainland Japan, because so many people would have died. 100,000 to a million. Americans, not to mention millions of Japanese. They were ready to go to defend their islands. So they decided to drop the bombs. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Manhattan Project. And depending on the class period, we may have already started talking about it, but this ugly monstrosity, this sci-fi looking thing here, is the test bomb called Trinity. Hey, so if you happen to have your actual packet, then this actually was at the bottom of page 38. If you do not have your packet, it's no big deal. But do me a favor, and at this point, start, get any kind of piece of paper is fine. Jot some notes down, because there will be a little Google form. I'm not even going to call it a Google quiz. I'm just going to call it a Google form to take after this to prove that you're paying attention. So, Manhattan Project. That's our plan, to build the secret bomb. And it was so top secret. Oh my goodness, this is like the most top secret thing imaginable for the U.S. government. We are getting help from our buddies, the British and the Canadians. The best and the brightest scientists that we had access to are working on this. And man, if you're there, this is super top secret stuff. Loose talk helps our enemy. So if you're one of these defense industry workers, you better shut your mouth. If I had you in, I know first period we already saw this slide, for example, that defines what a nuclear bomb is. We don't need to define a nuclear bomb. This isn't science class, but some people are kind of into that stuff. The science nerds among us. I was telling my first period, at least, that Albert Einstein, this cool guy, this world famous scientist, said FDR, hey, look, he wrote him a letter and said, just so you know, there's this new possibility of this new kind of bomb using this new field of physics, atomic physics, and we can't afford to let Nazi Germany develop it before us. Can you imagine if Hitler got this bomb? Also, the Russians were trying to work on it. I don't think they were quite as far as we were. Now, we are friends with the Russians, remember, but we had nothing in common with the Russians other than a common enemy of trying to fight the Nazis. So stay tuned for that whole debacle of who has the atomic weapons after World War II. It's called the Cold War. So we want to develop our bombs. So if you had to write something, I guess what's underlined here would be a good thing to write. FDR gets a letter from Einstein. You can pause it if you need to. So where is this taking place? It's taking place all over the place. I mean, the country is divided into these separate top secret facilities. The government is creating cities. You could write down what's underlined here. 30 different sites. It's okay. You don't have to write down all these things or anything, but Hanford, Washington, up here in Washington State, was created. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Los Alamos. Now, Los Alamos is where the actual testing is going to take place. I'll show you pictures of that. But over here, Tennessee. Let's see. Tennessee. It's located in the Tennessee Valley region. I think we talked about that, didn't we? Remember the Tennessee Valley Authority in the 30s? What did they have? They had clean hydroelectric power plants making electricity. Oak Ridge is located there because to make little baby amounts of plutonium and uranium, the size of like a bouncy ball or something, goes in the core of the bomb. They were using up to 1/6 of the country's electricity to make these small little amounts of uranium and plutonium to use in the bomb. So that's why that was placed there in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. So there you go. That was a good thing that the TVA was around. What are the results we got? Well, the ugly bomb I showed you before, called Trinity, with all the wires coming out, and then we had Little Boy and Fat Man. So do me a favor, if you have your paper, why don't you write down the three names? They're pretty fun names. Little Boy and Fat Man. And I swear, you guys better not be making fat jokes right now. I know I can't hear you, but that would be so cruel of you to do that, make fat jokes behind my back. All right. Here is the first bomb that was ever used. First atomic bomb, which you can say nuclear bomb. It's the same thing. The nucleus is splitting is what's going on. So they did this in New Mexico, in the middle of the desert, middle of federal property. No one's around for miles and miles and miles. They exploded at the top of this tower that they built to simulate what would happen if it was dropped from a plane. It would have to go off a couple hundred feet in the air to get the maximum spread of the bomb, of the explosion blowing outwards. This is all that's left of some of the rebar. See the wire, the rebar? It just melted, just completely. This is all that's left. This is Leslie Groves. He was in charge of the project. This is one of the scientists who, oh man, he struggled with what he'd created later on in life. In fact, and he knew he created this killing machine. So they did it. They had, less than a month later, they put those bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, on a ship. They didn't even tell the captain of the ship what it was, what they were carrying, until they were underway at sea. August 6th, 1945. They dropped the bomb, Little Boy, on Hiroshima. See, write down what's underlined. The numbers are all over the place. No one knows exactly how many. We'll just say 70,000 people killed instantly. Like either instantly or within that day. How about that? Because I'll show you a graph here. Depends how close you were to the epicenter or the ground zero. But if you add in the coming days, weeks, months, and years, easily 200,000 people died because of the radiation, long-term radiation, and cancer, the effects that went on. This is a picture showing, well, of course, the devastation of what was left. If you were near ground zero where this first bomb hit Hiroshima, you're literally, I don't want to say melted, but like evaporated. There's no record of like a human body. It's nothing. It's just disintegrated into dust. It's gone. Buildings, same thing. Now, a lot of their homes were built of, wood, paper, not the sturdiest building materials, but not that it would really matter at that point. 1,000 yards out. Remember, 1,000 yards? You know how many yards is a football field? 100 yards? So you figure, well, about 120, I guess, including the end zones. But you figure 10 or so football fields out, 20 football fields out. This is some serious distance we're talking about with that mushroom cloud was doing the damage. Now, if you're further out here, you might have survived. You might be like this person. You might have survived, but you're burned. And your skin is like melting off, and it's terrible. But these people down here, these charred remains, they must have been relatively close. So sad. So yeah, no one's ever really going to know the full death toll, but easily 70,000 died that day. Now, there's 3 parts of the atomic bomb. This is something that I think is so fascinating to think what man has created here, that there's blast, there's heat, there's radiation. As for blast, you know how when you watch a movie and there's like someone throws a grenade, like a soldier throws a grenade and people are flying through the air because of the concussion? The blast is like the concussion that hits you in the chest and it knocks you on your butt. There's the heat, which just ignites everything on fire, such as this person's skin. And then there's the radiation, which, I mean, we're talking about radioactive elements. So it's on your skin, it's in the air, it's falling from the air, collecting with the dust, falling back to the ground, which is what radioactive fallout is. That's the long-term problem. And how about this? Even 20 Americans killed, ironically, when we dropped the bomb, because they had been held prisoner of war by the Japanese in the city of Hiroshima. So isn't that an extra shame that 20 American airmen were killed there? And the clothing was melted onto people, like the imprints were melted onto people. This is nasty stuff. This is as bad as it gets. And lots of journalists were on the ground after the fact writing and letting people know what went on. And there's even something like this so fascinating where shadows were burned into the concrete. This actually is a shadow of a man that had been sitting there. And there's other pictures like this. This is just one of them. But this man was sitting there when the bomb went off. And the explosion, the blast, the concussion, was so impressive. They say that when this bomb goes off, it's literally multiple times hotter than the surface of the sun, which I can't fathom that. But this guy, his body absorbed so much of the heat, and he just disintegrated into nothing. But like the concrete around it was bleached. Think of it that way, kind of like a power washer. If you guys have ever used a power washer, the concrete around it was bleached by the intense heat. His body kind of absorbed a lot of that, so the concrete underneath of him was not. Same thing with the concrete here on these. This is some serious, nasty stuff. I'll post a video, a 4-minute video on Google Classroom if you're interested. It's really cool. It shows how this all went down. So we're dropping leaflets. We're like, hey, Japan. Of course, it's going to be written in Japanese. It says, hey, Japan, just so you know, we made this bomb. We used it. It's the equivalent of what 2,000 of our giant B-29 bombers can carry. We promise you. We used it. It's real. Ask your country. They're lying to you. We used it. Tell them to surrender. But they don't surrender. They're silent. They ignore it. So 3 days go by, and we drop the second bomb on Nagasaki. So write down Nagasaki, August 9th, 1945. I don't care if you know it's Fat Man, but the numbers are, who knows how accurate they are, but at least 40,000 died. They say this was actually a more powerful bomb. They expected it to do more damage, but Nagasaki is in a valley, and the bomb couldn't spread out. The blast couldn't spread out as much, and but either way, this is just an unspeakable amount of death and destruction. So again, we drop leaflets written in Japanese to the people, warning, hey, tell your country to surrender, or else we're going to do this again and again and again. Now, if you're paying attention, you might realize this is actually a lie, because we only had 3 bombs at this point. All we had was enough uranium and plutonium for 3 bombs. But, they didn't know. We were bluffing. We were hoping they weren't going to call our bluff. And they did not call our bluff. After a few days, they actually do surrender. The emperor gets on the radio for the first time. People were kind of freaking out. They'd never heard the emperor's voice before, the Japanese emperor. And he said, we must do this. It's enough. It's over. And so there's VJ Day is celebrated, August 15th. So VE Day was May 8th. This is VJ Day, Victory over Japan. Hey, my little trick. You know me. I like to have memory tricks to remember stuff. The way I remember the bombs and all the VJ Day stuff was the first bomb was August 6th on Hiroshima. Second bomb August 9th, Nagasaki. 6 plus 9 equals 15. I used a calculator. I swear it's true. August 15th, 1945 is VJ Day. So that's pretty interesting. That works out well. This is them signing. This is the delegation signing. General Douglas MacArthur is on the ship receiving their signing of the documents. World War II saw such terrible things going on that people had to decide how do we handle all this stuff? Is it okay what we just did? Like, is this a good thing? I mean, obviously it's not a good thing, but is it acceptable? Does warfare have rules? Should it have rules? I mean, is it even possible? Is there such thing as rules to warfare? And unfortunately, we're not in person to talk about these things, but it's something to think about. But I want to mention real quickly, I don't want this to be any longer than it has to be, but I do want to say there's unspeakable things that happen, and what are we going to do with these people? For example, like the Holocaust, the Germans, all the things that they orchestrated with the 6 million people being killed over there. They created the Nuremberg Trials. The world got together in the Europe side of things and created the Nuremberg Trials. Why Nuremberg? Well, Nuremberg is a city in Germany, and it's the city in Germany where they created those racist laws at the beginning of Hitler's power to take away rights from Jews. So they fittingly had these trials in Nuremberg, and they called them the Nuremberg Trials. And they came up with 3 different classifications of what could get you, a German leader or an Italian leader, what could get you in big trouble. They created this designation, crimes against peace, which is a brand new concept. People who planned or prepared or started or waging wars of aggression or started wars in violation of international agreements. So if you started a war, if you did something to start the war, then you can get put on trial for that. War crimes, including violations of customs or laws of war, including improper treatment of civilians or prisoners of war. So if you're someone who is in charge of a prisoner camp and you're abusing the American POWs, or whichever country it is, those kinds of things get you designated as guilty of war crimes. And then this new designation also, crimes against humanity. That was not a thing before. This was a 1945, a brand new idea. And this is related to the Holocaust. Look at it. Including murder, enslavement, or deportation of civilians, or persecution of on political, religious, or racial grounds. So they had 3 sets of trials, okay? The big shots, like the big Nazi big shots who were in charge of these mass organizing of the Holocaust, for example, were put on what's called the major war trials, war criminal trials. 24 of those big shots were there. Now Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, his associate, and then Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, they all commit suicide before they could be arrested. They weren't able to be brought on trial. They took that way out. But the other people, a lot of them, you don't have to write this down, by the way. You do not have to write this down. Just pay attention and learn for the sake of learning. But the big shots were, of course, put on trial. International military tribunals, and they were found guilty, of course, the vast majority of them. There's a second round of trials for like the lesser criminals, not the big shots. You didn't know these people's names from the newspapers, but they still did terrible things. Maybe they were in charge of like a concentration camp. Maybe you were the guy in charge of a camp and ordering all these people to be killed. So now you're here on these lesser trials, and so many of these people have given death sentences. And then finally, across the oceans, in Japan, same thing. Death sentence for Hideki Tojo. Remember Hideki Tojo, the prime minister, war minister? These other people, remember the rape of Nanking? The way the Japanese invaded down southward into China and the city of Nanking? We read the terrible reading together. Those kinds of things are going to get them plus 16 others either death or life imprisonment. So look, I know that was kind of long. I apologize, but I'm not there with you in person. Please go back to classroom, take the little Google form, prove to me that you paid attention, and we'll be good. Now look, if you're unhappy with your score, sure, we can work together. Take me a picture of your notes, upload it to Classroom or something, but to prove it to me, and I'll be happy. But stick together. Please email me if there's something going on, if there's a problem. Let me know. All right, guys. See you next time.